The sky had been grey for 3 days, the kind of grey that pressed down on everything and made even simple tasks feel heavier than they should. Rain came in fits, never quite committing to a storm, but never stopping long enough to let the ground dry. The single mother stood at her kitchen window, watching water bead and slide down the glass in thin, erratic streams, while behind her the coffee maker sputtered its last drops into a chipped mug that had lost its handle years ago. She was 34, though most days she felt decades older. Her name was inscribed on bills and overdue notices that arrived with relentless regularity, but she rarely thought of herself that way anymore. She was Mom, a title that had consumed every other identity she might have claimed. Her hands bore the evidence of that life. Rough from cleaning jobs that paid by the hour, scarred from kitchen knives that slipped when exhaustion made her careless, permanently wrinkled from water that was never quite the right temperature. The apartment was small, the kind of place landlords described as cozy when what they meant was cramped. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that opened directly into a living room, barely large enough for a couch, and a television that only worked when the antenna was angled just right. The walls were thin enough that she knew her neighbor's schedule better than her own, and the heating worked in winter only if she kept the thermostat low enough to make the children sleep in sweatshirts. Her daughter was 7, bright-eyed and quick to laugh despite everything. Her son had just turned 5, still young enough to believe that struggle was simply how life worked. That dinner, sometimes being cereal, was normal. That new clothes coming from thrift stores was what everyone did. She loved them with a ferocity that frightened her sometimes, a love so consuming it left little room for anything else, including hope for herself. The bills on the counter told their own story. Rent, overdue by 12 days. Electric, paid late with a fee that made her jaw clench. Medical bills from when her daughter had fallen and needed stitches, an expense she was still paying off in tiny increments that barely touched the principal. Grocery receipts carefully tallied, every item chosen not for preference, but for price per meal. She had learned to calculate in ways she never imagined she would need to, measuring everything against what her children required first. Work came in fragments. She cleaned houses 3 days a week, offices twice more, and filled in wherever extra shifts appeared. The pay was never quite enough, and the hours stretched her so thin that some mornings she woke feeling more exhausted than when she had gone to bed. Her car was old, a sedan with over 200,000 miles that coughed when it started and burned oil she could barely afford to replace. She kept a jug of it in the trunk, adding more every few days, praying the engine would hold just a little longer. The notice had arrived 2 weeks earlier, printed on crisp white paper that made its message feel even more brutal. Rent increase, effective next month. Not large by most standards, but enough to break the fragile balance she had constructed. She had read it 3 times, hoping the words would change, then folded it carefully and placed it with the other documents she could not bring herself to throw away, but could not bear to look at often. She had called the landlord, her voice steady despite the panic clawing at her throat. She explained her situation, asked if there was any flexibility, offered to take on additional cleaning for the building in exchange for holding the current rate. The answer had been polite but firm. Market rates were rising. Other tenants were waiting. If she could not afford it, perhaps she should consider relocating. Relocating, the word made her stomach twist. She had moved 4 times in the past 6 years, each apartment slightly worse than the last, each neighborhood a little farther from the children's school, from work, from anything stable. The thought of uprooting them again, of packing their few belongings into boxes and convincing them that this time it would be different, felt impossible. That morning, she had sat at the table after the children left for school and opened her laptop, the screen flickering to life with a faint buzz that suggested it too was on borrowed time. She searched rental listings with a desperation that made her chest tight, scrolling through options that were either too expensive or too far or too damaged to be livable. Most required deposits she could not afford, references she could not provide, credit scores that disqualified her before she even called. She had nearly closed the laptop when she saw it. The listing was brief, almost dismissive, buried beneath a dozen other properties that advertised amenities and modern kitchens. Old weather observation tower, residential conversion potential, sold as is, cash offers preferred. The price was listed at $650. She stared at it, certain it was a mistake, a typo, or a scam. No property cost that little, not even abandoned ones. The photographs were few and poorly lit. The tower stood alone on a patch of overgrown land, its structure narrow and tall, cylindrical with a domed top that looked like something from another era. The brickwork was weathered but intact, the windows small and placed at irregular intervals as it climbed. A metal staircase spiraled around the exterior, rusted but still present. The surrounding area was scrubby and unkempt, dotted with weeds and fallen branches, as if the land itself had given up trying. She clicked through the images slowly. The interior shots showed cramped circular rooms, stacked one above another, each barely wide enough for a bed or a table. Exposed brick walls, concrete floors, a single pipe running vertically through the center that might have been plumbing or might have been structural. The listing mentioned no utilities, no guarantees, and strongly advised against occupation without significant renovation. It was absurd. It was impractical. It was possibly dangerous. And yet, she found herself staring at it long after she should have moved on. $650. She had more than that, barely, saved in an envelope taped inside a kitchen cabinet. Money she had been setting aside for emergencies, a cushion so thin it barely qualified as one. This was not what it was meant for. This was not sensible. But the rent increase was real, and the alternative was eviction or another move that would cost far more than $650, even if she found a place that would take them. The tower, strange as it was, represented something she had not felt in years. Possibility, not comfort, not security, but the faint chance that she might stop running long enough to breathe. She called the number listed, her heart pounding harder than the situation warranted. The voice that answered was brisk, uninterested, as if this call was one of many that would lead nowhere. She asked about the tower, whether the listing was real, what the condition was actually like. The man on the other end sighed, a sound that suggested he had answered these questions too many times already. It is what it says. Old tower, been empty for decades. Some group used it for weather observations back in the day. Then it got abandoned. Roof leaks, probably needs everything redone. You'd be buying it for the land more than the structure. She asked if she could see it in person. The man paused, then gave her an address and a time the following afternoon. No guarantees, he said. If someone else makes an offer first, it is gone. That night, she told the children they were going on an adventure. She did not mention the tower, did not explain what she was considering. She simply said they would drive out to see something interesting, and they accepted it with the easy trust of children who believed their mother always knew what she was doing. She wished she felt half as certain. The next day arrived overcast but dry, the clouds thinning just enough to let pale sunlight through. She loaded the children into the car, checked the oil level out of habit, and followed the directions she had written on the back of an envelope. The route took them out of the city, past neighborhoods that gradually grew sparser, past fields that looked tired and businesses that had long since closed. The road narrowed as they drove, pavement giving way to gravel, then dirt packed hard by years of use. Her daughter asked where they were going. and she said simply that they were looking at a place, nothing more. Her son fell asleep in the back seat, his head lolling against the window, and she envied him the ability to rest so easily. When the tower came into view, it rose from the land like a forgotten monument, taller than she had expected, its brick surface darkened by weather and time, its shape unmistakable even from a distance. The metal staircase wrapped around it in a tight spiral, clinging to the exterior like a vine that had been frozen mid-climb. The dome at the top gleamed faintly, its surface curved and smooth, a strange contrast to the roughness of everything below. She parked and stepped out, her boots sinking slightly into soft earth. The air smelled of damp grass and rust, and the silence felt heavier here, as if the land absorbed sound rather than carrying it. Her daughter climbed out beside her, eyes wide as she stared up at the tower. "Is that it?" she asked. "Is that where we are going to live?" The question hung in the air, and the mother felt something twist inside her. She had not said that, had not even decided yet, but her daughter's words made it real in a way the listing never had. "Maybe," she said carefully. "We will see." A truck pulled up behind them, and a man stepped out, clipboard in hand. He was older, his face weathered, his movements slow but deliberate. He introduced himself with a nod, barely meeting her eyes, and gestured toward the tower. "This is it. Like I said, it needs work." She followed him as he unlocked the heavy metal door at the base, the hinges groaning as it swung inward. Inside, the air was cooler, stale, but not foul. The first floor was a single circular room, its walls bare brick, its floor uneven concrete. A metal ladder was bolted to the wall, leading upward through a hole in the ceiling. The man pointed toward it. 5 floors total, plus the dome. Gets narrower the higher you go. She climbed carefully, testing each rung before trusting her weight to it. The second floor was similar to the first, slightly smaller, with a single window that let in weak light. The third floor held remnants of old equipment, metal brackets bolted to the walls, wires that led nowhere. The fourth floor was empty, except for dust and a faint smell of mold that made her nose wrinkle. When she reached the 5th floor, she paused. This room felt different. The ceiling here was lower, the space more confined, but the walls held something she had not seen below. Scratches, faint and irregular, as if someone had marked the surface over and over. She ran her fingers over them, feeling the grooves, trying to discern a pattern. They were too deliberate to be random, but too chaotic to make immediate sense. Above her, a hatch led to the dome. She pushed it open and climbed through, emerging into a space that stole her breath. The dome was mostly glass, its curved surface offering a view in every direction. The land stretched away endlessly, fields and distant trees and roads that disappeared into the horizon. The sky above was vast, close enough that she felt she could reach up and touch it. Her daughter climbed up beside her, gasping at the sight. "It is like we are in the clouds," she whispered. The mother nodded, unable to speak for a moment. She had not expected this. The view, yes, but not the feeling that came with it. Standing there, high above the ground, she felt something she had not allowed herself to feel in years. Not hope, not quite, but something close. A loosening of the constant pressure. A sense that perhaps the world was larger than her immediate struggles. The man called up from below, asking if she had seen enough. She climbed back down slowly, her mind already racing through possibilities she had no business considering. The children could not live here, not as it was. There was no plumbing, no heat, no kitchen. The floors were too steep, the spaces too small. It was impractical in every measurable way. And yet, when she stood outside again and looked up at the tower, she saw something no one else seemed to. Potential. not in the structure itself, but in what it represented. A place that was hers, that no landlord could raise the rent on, that no one could take away as long as she held the deed. It was not a home, not yet, but it was land. It was space. It was a chance. The man waited, arms crossed, his expression suggesting he expected her to walk away. Most people did, he said. Too much trouble. She pulled the envelope from her purse, the one she had been carrying since the day before, and counted out $650 in cash. Bills she had saved one at a time, folded and smoothed, and stored away for a moment she had never been able to define. This, she realized, was that moment. The man's eyebrows lifted slightly, but he took the money without comment. He produced a receipt, a key, and a single sheet of paper that outlined the transfer. No inspection, no guarantees, no recourse if the structure proved unsound. She signed without hesitation, her hand steady, despite the enormity of what she was doing. When he handed her the key, it felt heavier than it should have, as if it carried the weight of every choice that had led her to this place. As the man drove away, she stood alone with her children beside the tower. Her daughter tugged at her sleeve. "Are we really going to live here?" she asked again. The mother looked up at the structure, its height dizzying from this angle, its surface scarred and worn, and she felt the first stirrings of something she had not allowed herself in so long: determination. "Not yet," she said, "but maybe. We will see." That night, back in the apartment, she lay awake long after the children had fallen asleep. The key rested on the nightstand beside her, catching faint light from the street outside. She thought about the tower, about the scratches on the wall, about the dome that opened to the sky. She thought about the mockery that would come when people learned what she had done, the judgment she would face for spending money on something so impractical. But she also thought about the rent increase, about the endless cycle of moving and struggling and never quite catching up. The tower was a gamble, reckless and uncertain. But staying where she was felt like slow suffocation, and she had been holding her breath for too long already. She would face the consequences, whatever they were. She always did. But this time, she would face them standing in a place that was hers. The following days unfolded with a strange momentum, as if her decision had set something in motion that could not easily be stopped. She told no one at first, carrying the secret like a fragile thing she was afraid might shatter if spoken aloud. But secrets had a way of escaping, especially in small circles where everyone knew too much about everyone else. It began at work. She was cleaning a house, scrubbing a bathtub with methodical precision, when the homeowner wandered in and made small talk. The woman was kind, well-meaning, the type who asked about the children and remembered their names. She mentioned offhandedly that she had heard the mother was looking at properties, that someone had seen her out near the old weather station. The mother straightened, her back protesting, and wiped her hands on her apron. She confirmed it briefly, offering no details, but the woman pressed gently. "A weather station," she said, laughing lightly. "That is unusual. Are you thinking of renovating it?" The mother nodded, non-committal, and the woman's laughter softened into something that sounded almost like pity. "Well," she said, "that is ambitious. I hope it works out for you." The phrase lingered long after the conversation ended. "I hope it works out for you." It was the kind of thing people said when they expected failure, but were too polite to say so directly. She finished the job in silence, her jaw tight, and drove home with the radio off, her thoughts too loud to drown out. At the children's school, the judgment arrived more quickly. She had mentioned the tower to another mother during pickup, explaining why she might need to adjust her schedule in the coming weeks. The woman's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a flicker of surprise followed by carefully controlled neutrality. "A tower," she repeated. Like an actual tower? The mother confirmed it, and the woman nodded slowly. That sounds interesting. By the next day, the whispers had spread. She felt them as she walked through the parking lot, saw them in the glances exchanged between other parents. No one said anything directly, but the air had changed, charged with a curiosity that edged toward mockery. One father, someone she barely knew, stopped her as she was leaving and asked with exaggerated concern if she had checked for structural issues. "Towers like that," he said, shaking his head. "They are usually condemned for a reason." She thanked him for the advice and walked away, her hands trembling as she gripped the steering wheel. She knew what he meant. She knew what they all meant. That she had made a mistake, that she was foolish, that desperation had driven her to something indefensible. And maybe they were right. But their certainty only made her more determined not to give them the satisfaction of being proven correct. Her sister called that week, her voice tight with a frustration she did not bother to hide. "I heard what you did," she said, not bothering with pleasantries. "A weather tower? Are you serious?" The mother explained, or tried to, but her words sounded thin even to her own ears. Her sister cut her off. "You are a single mother, with 2 kids, and barely enough to cover rent. And you spent $600 on a tower that probably does not even have running water." The mother stayed quiet, letting the criticism wash over her. When her sister finally paused, she said simply, "I know what I am doing." Her sister laughed, short and sharp. "Do you? Because from here, it looks like you are throwing money away on something you cannot afford to fix." The call ended shortly after, leaving the mother sitting alone in the dim light of her kitchen, staring at the key that had become both a burden and a lifeline. The tower itself waited, indifferent to the judgment swirling around it. She visited it twice more that week, once alone and once with the children. Each time, she climbed the floors slowly, examining details she had missed before. The wiring on the 3rd floor, though old, was still intact in places. The windows, small as they were, opened and closed with effort. The dome, when she cleaned the glass with a rag and water she brought in a jug, revealed even more of the sky. On her second visit, she brought tools, a hammer, a screwdriver, a tape measure. She was not a builder, had no training in construction or renovation, but she understood work. She understood that progress came in small, deliberate steps, that large problems could be broken into manageable pieces if you were patient enough. She measured the rooms, sketched rough plans on paper. She brought in a notebook, calculated what it might cost to bring in electricity, to install plumbing, to make the space livable. The numbers were staggering. Far more than she had, far more than she could save in any reasonable time frame. But she wrote them down anyway, refusing to let impossibility stop her from planning. She had learned that hope was not about believing things would be easy. It was about refusing to accept that they were impossible. Her daughter climbed to the dome while she worked, sitting cross-legged on the floor and staring out at the sky. After a while, she called down, "Mom, why did you buy this place?" The mother paused, tools in hand, and considered the question. "Because," she said finally, "we needed something that was ours." Her daughter thought about that, then nodded, as if it made perfect sense. At night, back in the apartment, she lay awake and thought about the scratches on the 5th floor. She had noticed them again during her last visit, and this time she had studied them more closely. They were not random. They formed shapes, patterns, clusters that repeated. She could not decipher them, not yet, but they felt intentional, as if someone had left a message that only made sense from a certain angle or under certain light. The thought unsettled her, but it also stirred something else: curiosity. The tower had a history, and that history had left marks. If she was going to make this place hers, She needed to understand what it had been before. She needed to know what she was stepping into. The mockery continued. At the grocery store, a neighbor saw her and asked with barely concealed amusement how the tower project was going. She answered vaguely, and the neighbor laughed. "You are braver than I am," he said. "I would not touch that place for any amount of money." At work, a co-worker joked that she was going to start a castle, that maybe she would charge admission. The laughter that followed was not cruel, but it stung all the same. She endured it because she had no choice. Pride was a luxury she could not afford, and anger wasted energy she needed elsewhere. But late at night, when the apartment was quiet and the bills still sat unpaid on the counter, she allowed herself a small defiance. Let them laugh. Let them judge. She had done harder things than this. She had survived worse. And this time, she was not just surviving, she was building. The days shortened as autumn settled in, and the air took on a sharpness that made mornings feel more urgent. The mother moved through her routines with the same steady determination, working her shifts, caring for her children, visiting the tower whenever she could steal a few hours. Each visit revealed something new, not because the structure had changed, but because she was learning to see it differently. The first floor, which had seemed hopelessly bare and cold, began to take shape in her mind as a potential living space. If she could patch the walls, insulate them somehow, and bring in a portable heater, it might be livable. The second floor could serve as storage, stacked with the few belongings they had, while the higher floors remained works in progress, projects for a future she was still trying to believe in. She brought cleaning supplies on her next visit. A bucket, rags, a broom with bristles worn soft from years of use. She swept the first floor methodically, pushing out debris, dead leaves, and dirt that had accumulated over decades. The concrete beneath was cracked in places, but solid. When the light hit it at the right angle, she could see faint traces of old paint, lines that might have once marked sections or measurements for equipment that no longer existed. The children came with her sometimes, their presence turning the work into something less solitary. Her daughter explored each floor with the wide-eyed wonder of someone discovering a secret world, while her son stayed close, asking endless questions about what they would do with the tower, whether they could paint the walls, whether they would have a real bedroom someday. She answered as best she could, careful not to promise more than she might be able to deliver. On one visit, as she scrubbed grime from the second-floor walls, her daughter called down from above, "Mom, come, look at this." The mother climbed the ladder, her arms aching, and found her daughter standing in the center of the fifth floor, pointing at the scratches on the wall. "Do you see it?" she asked. The mother moved closer, angling her head to follow her daughter's gaze. The scratches, which had seemed random before, resolved into something clearer when viewed from this position. They formed shapes, rough outlines that resembled clouds, some elongated and stretched, others compact and rounded. Beneath them, smaller marks clustered in patterns that might have been rain or stars or something else entirely. The mother stood there, tracing the lines with her eyes, feeling a strange pull she could not name. Her daughter touched the wall gently. "Someone used to watch the sky here," she said. The mother nodded slowly, the realization settling over her. Of course, this had been a weather observation tower. People had stood in this exact spot, studying clouds, tracking storms, recording patterns. The scratches were not vandalism. They were records, observations etched into the wall by someone who cared deeply about what they saw. She thought about that often in the days that followed. Someone had stood here once, doing work that mattered, marking their findings in the only way available to them. That person was gone now, their name forgotten, their observations rendered obsolete by technology that made towers like this unnecessary. But the marks remained, a quiet testament to effort and attention. It made her feel less alone. She was not the first person to struggle in this place, to work against odds that others dismissed. She was simply the latest. And if those earlier efforts had left traces that endured, perhaps hers would too. The mockery from others persisted, but its edge had dulled slightly. People still asked about the tower, still shook their heads in disbelief, but the questions came less often now, as if her refusal to abandon the project had made it less interesting as a source of amusement. She preferred it that way. Invisibility was safer than scrutiny. Her finances remained precarious. The rent in the apartment was due again, and she paid it with money she could not afford to lose. Knowing that each payment brought her closer to a breaking point she was not ready to face. She picked up an extra shift cleaning an office building, working late into the night while the children stayed with a neighbor who charged her nothing but expected favors in return. She accepted the arrangement without complaint, understanding that survival required a constant balancing of debts, both financial and social. At the tower, she made slow progress. She patched the worst of the cracks in the first-floor walls with material she bought cheaply from a hardware store, mixing it by hand and spreading it carefully. The result was uneven, but it held. She sealed the door as best she could, replacing the rusted hinges with new ones that cost more than she wanted to spend, but were necessary if the space was going to be secure. One afternoon, as she worked alone, she heard a sound above her, faint, almost imperceptible, like the creak of metal under strain. She froze, her pulse quickening, and listened. The sound came again, longer this time, a soft groan that seemed to emanate from higher up in the structure. She climbed the ladder slowly, her hands gripping the rungs tightly, and moved through the floors one by one, searching for the source. When she reached the 5th floor, she paused. The sound was clearer here, rhythmic and deliberate. It was not the wind, it was not settling, it was something else. She crossed to the hatch that led to the dome and pushed it open, climbing through into the glass-enclosed space. The light was dimmer now, the sun hidden behind clouds that stretched across the horizon in thick, uneven layers. She stood there, scanning the interior of the dome, looking for anything out of place. The glass was intact, the metal framework solid. But as she turned slowly, her gaze fell on something she had not noticed before. In the very center of the dome's ceiling, where the curved glass met a central support beam, there was a seam. It was subtle, almost invisible, a line that might have been a joint or a flaw in the construction. But when she looked closer, she saw that it was too precise, too deliberate. She reached up, her fingers brushing the seam, and felt a faint give beneath her touch. Her heart beat faster. This was not part of the original structure. This was something added later, concealed within the framework. She pressed harder, and the seam shifted slightly, revealing a narrow gap. Cold air seeped through, carrying with it a scent she could not immediately place. Clean, metallic, faintly chemical. She pulled her hand back, her mind racing. The tower had secrets, and she had just uncovered the edge of one. She climbed back down to the 5th floor, her thoughts churning, and stared at the scratches on the wall with new eyes. Clouds, rain, patterns, observations. But observations of what? And why had someone felt the need to hide something in the dome above? That night, she could not sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment over and over. The seam, the gap, the cold air. She had no tools to investigate further, no expertise to understand what she had found. But she knew instinctively that this was important, that the tower was more than it appeared, that the $650 she had spent was not the mistake everyone believed it to be. The next morning, she returned to the tower with a flashlight, a screwdriver, and a determination that bordered on reckless. She climbed straight to the dome. ignoring the other floors, and stood once more beneath the seam. In the daylight, it was even more obvious. She tested the edges carefully, applying pressure at different points, and felt the mechanism respond. It was a panel, she realized, hidden within the dome, designed to open but secured in a way that required precision. She worked slowly, methodically, using the screwdriver to pry gently at the edges. The metal resisted, stiff with age and disuse, but it moved. Inch by inch, the panel loosened, and the gap widened. When it finally gave way, it swung downward on a hinge she had not seen, revealing a narrow shaft that climbed upward into darkness. She shone the flashlight into the opening, her breath shallow. The beam cut through the gloom, illuminating metal rungs bolted to the walls of the shaft, leading up into a space above the dome that should not have existed. The structure, from the outside, appeared to end at the glass enclosure. But here, concealed within the framework, was an extension, a hidden level. Her hands trembled as she gripped the first rung. She tested it, pulling hard to ensure it would hold her weight, then began to climb. The shaft was narrow, forcing her to move carefully, her elbows brushing against the walls. As she ascended, the air grew cooler, and the metallic scent intensified. After several feet, her head emerged into a space that made her gasp. It was a room, small, circular, perfectly sealed. The walls were smooth, lined with panels that gleamed faintly, even in the dim light of her flashlight. The floor was metal, polished, and clean, as if it had been maintained recently, despite the tower's abandonment. In the center of the room stood a structure she could not immediately identify. It was cylindrical, reinforced, with a heavy door on one side, marked by symbols she did not recognize. She stepped fully into the room, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. This was not part of a weather observation station. This was something else entirely, something deliberate, something hidden. She moved closer to the cylindrical structure, her flashlight beam sweeping across its surface. The metal was cold to the touch, unyielding, and the door was sealed with a lock that looked far more modern than anything else in the tower. She stood there, frozen, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. This room, this vault, had been built for a purpose, and whatever that purpose was, it had been important enough to conceal within a structure that most people dismissed as worthless. She thought about the scratches on the wall below, about the clouds and patterns, about observations, about someone who had worked here, who had known what lay above, who had left marks to remember what they had seen. And then, as the realization settled over her, she understood the clouds, the sky, the tower's position, high and isolated. This was not just a place for watching weather. This was a place for watching something else, something that moved through the sky, something that required secrecy and precision, and a vault sealed against time. She climbed back down slowly, her legs shaking, and emerged into the dome with the panel still hanging open above her. The sky outside had darkened, clouds gathering, and she felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She had bought the tower for $650, expecting nothing more than land and the slim chance of shelter. She had found a secret instead, and whatever that secret held, it was waiting just beyond the locked door above her. The mother did not return to the tower for 3 days. The discovery of the hidden room, the sealed vault, the impossible architecture concealed within a structure everyone dismissed as worthless, had left her shaken in a way she could not fully articulate. She went through her routines with mechanical precision, cleaning houses, feeding her children, answering their questions about when they would visit the tower again with vague promises she was not certain she could keep. At night, Alone in the dark apartment, she replayed the moment over and over. The cold metal beneath her hands, the symbols on the vault door, the absolute certainty that what lay inside mattered in ways she did not yet understand. Fear whispered that she should walk away, that some discoveries carried consequences too heavy to bear. But curiosity, and something deeper, something that felt like destiny, pulled her back. On the fourth day, she woke before dawn and made her decision. She would return. She would open the vault, or try to, and whatever she found would determine what came next. She left the children with her neighbor, explaining she had extra work, and drove to the tower as the sun climbed above the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange that seemed almost deliberately beautiful. The tower stood exactly as she had left it, patient and indifferent. She unlocked the door, stepped inside, and felt the familiar coolness of the air settle around her. The climb to the 5th floor felt longer this time, each rung of the ladder a small commitment, a step deeper into something she could not reverse. When she reached the dome and pushed open the hidden panel, the shaft above greeted her with the same darkness, the same metallic scent. She climbed. Her muscles remembered the path now, moving with more confidence than before. When she emerged into the hidden room, the vault waited exactly where she had left it, its surface gleaming faintly in the beam of her flashlight. She circled it slowly, examining every detail. The lock was heavy, sophisticated, the kind that required a key or a combination she did not possess. The symbols etched around the doorframe were unfamiliar, geometric patterns that might have been decorative or might have held meaning she could not decipher. She knelt and studied the base of the vault. The construction was flawless, welded seamlessly to the floor, designed to withstand force. Breaking in was not an option, not with the tools she had, not without damaging whatever lay inside. She needed to understand the mechanism, to find the logic hidden within the design. She ran her fingers along the edges of the door, feeling for seams, for anything that might give way. The metal was smooth, unbroken, but near the top, just above the lock, her fingers caught on a slight irregularity. A small panel, no larger than her palm, set flush with the surface. She pressed it gently. Nothing happened. She pressed harder, and the panel shifted inward with a soft click. A compartment opened, revealing a narrow slot and a small screen that flickered to life, glowing a pale green. Text appeared, blocky and old-fashioned, the kind that belonged to technology from decades past. The message was simple, almost mocking in its brevity. Enter observation date. Year, month, day. Her heart raced. An observation date. She thought immediately of the scratches on the wall below, the cloud patterns, the meticulous marks left by someone who had stood in this tower and recorded what they saw. Those were observations, but which one mattered? Which date unlocked the vault? She climbed back down to the 5th floor and studied the scratches with new urgency. There were dozens of them, maybe hundreds, scattered across the wall in clusters that suggested different sessions, different days. Some were darker, carved deeper, as if they held more significance. Others were faint, barely visible. She chose one of the deepest marks, a cloud formation that looked deliberate, almost artistic. Beneath it, etched in tiny numbers she had to squint to see, was a date. She memorized it, climbed back up to the vault, and entered the numbers carefully. The screen blinked, processed, then displayed a single word, incorrect. She tried again, choosing a different date, one that corresponded to a cluster of marks that seemed more complex. Incorrect. Again and again. Each attempt met with the same cold rejection. Frustration built in her chest, hot and tight. She had come this far, uncovered this much, and now she was being stopped by a puzzle she could not solve. She sat back on her heels, breathing slowly, forcing herself to think. Whoever built this vault had been deliberate. They had hidden it carefully, secured it with a system that required knowledge, not just effort. The answer was here. She simply had not found it yet. She descended once more, this time moving through every floor, searching for anything she might have missed. On the third floor, near the old equipment brackets, she found faint markings on the wall. Not scratches, but paint, so old it had nearly faded into the brick. Numbers, arranged in a sequence. A date. Her pulse quickened. She wrote it down on a scrap of paper and climbed back to the vault, her hands trembling slightly as she entered the digits. The screen blinked, processed. Then, with a mechanical hum that seemed impossibly loud in the confined space, the vault door released. The sound of metal sliding against metal echoed around her, and she stepped back instinctively, her breath caught in her throat. The door swung open slowly, revealing darkness within. She shone her flashlight inside, the beam cutting through the void, and felt her knees weaken. The vault was larger than it appeared from the outside, extending back into the structure in a way that defied the tower's dimensions. The walls were lined with metal shelving, and on those shelves, stacked neatly, sealed in containers that gleamed even under the dim light, was wealth beyond anything she had imagined. She stepped inside, her movements slow, dreamlike. The first container she opened held gemstones. Diamonds, rubies, emeralds, each one the size of her thumbnail or larger, arranged in rows that caught the light and fractured it into 1,000 colors. She lifted one, felt its weight, its cool smoothness, and set it down carefully, as if afraid it might shatter. The second container held gold. Bars, small and heavy, stamped with markings she did not recognize. She counted them without meaning to, her mind struggling to process the value. 10, 20, 30. More. The third container held documents, bonds, certificates, papers marked with official seals and signatures that suggested authority and legitimacy. She unfolded one carefully, her hands shaking, and read the denomination. $1 million. She checked another. The same. Another. The same. The room seemed to tilt around her. She steadied herself against the shelving, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. This was not a small fortune. This was not a lucky find. This was generational wealth, the kind that changed lives, that solved every problem she had ever faced and 1,000 more she had never considered. She moved deeper into the vault, her flashlight sweeping across more containers, more shelves, precious metals, rare coins, artifacts she could not immediately identify but knew instinctively were valuable. And at the very back, resting on a reinforced shelf, was a leather-bound ledger. She lifted it carefully, the cover worn but intact, and opened it to the first page. The handwriting was precise, methodical, each entry dated and described with the same attention to detail she had seen in the scratches on the wall. But this was not about weather. This was a record of transactions, of acquisitions, of a systematic accumulation of wealth over years, decades. The entries began in the 1,940 seconds and continued through the 1,960 seconds, each one noting an item, its value, and a cryptic reference to a source. Some entries mentioned names, locations, events that had the weight of history behind them. Others were vague, as if the writer had been careful not to reveal too much, even in their private records. Near the middle of the ledger, one entry stood out, a description of this very vault, its construction, its purpose. She read it slowly, her eyes moving over the words, with a mixture of awe and disbelief. The writer had been part of something, A network, a group that operated in secrecy, moving assets, preserving wealth during times of upheaval. The tower had been chosen for its isolation, its height, its ability to monitor the surrounding area without drawing attention. The vault had been designed as a safeguard, a place to hide what could not be entrusted to banks or governments. And then, for reasons the ledger did not fully explain, the operation had ended. The tower had been abandoned, the vault sealed, the contents left to wait for someone who might one day find them. She closed the ledger and held it against her chest, her mind reeling. This was not treasure in the romantic sense. This was not a pirate's hoard or a lost inheritance. This was calculated, deliberate, the result of planning and effort by people who understood risk and reward. And now, it was hers. She had bought the tower for $650, and in doing so, she had inherited something worth, she could barely bring herself to think it, hundreds of millions. She climbed back down in a daze, the ledger tucked under her arm, her thoughts racing too fast to catch. When she reached the ground floor, she sat on the cold concrete and stared at the walls, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Her life had been defined by scarcity, by the constant calculation of what she could afford and what she could not. And now, in the span of a single morning, that definition had shattered. She thought about her children, about the apartment with its thin walls and rising rent, about the medical bills and overdue notices, and the endless weight of never having enough. She thought about the people who had laughed at her, who had dismissed the tower as a foolish mistake, who had assumed she was too desperate to make rational decisions. And she felt something unfamiliar rise in her chest. Not triumph, not yet, but possibility. Real, tangible possibility. She locked the tower carefully and drove home in silence, the ledger hidden in a bag in the trunk. When she picked up her children, they asked if they could visit the tower soon, and she promised they would, though she did not say when. That night, after they were asleep, she sat at the kitchen table and opened the ledger again, reading through the entries one by one. She needed to understand what she had found, not just in terms of value, but in terms of responsibility. This wealth had been hidden for a reason, and bringing it into the light would carry consequences she could not yet predict. The next morning, she called in sick to work for the first time in years. She needed time to think, to plan, to decide what came next. She could not simply walk into a bank with gemstones and gold bars and expect them to ask no questions. She could not hire a lawyer without explaining where the assets had come from. And she could not tell the truth without risking that someone, somewhere, would claim the vault's contents belonged to them. She spent the day researching, her old laptop glowing in the dim light of the kitchen. She read about treasure trove laws, about abandoned property, about the legal definitions of ownership when assets had been left unclaimed for decades. The information was dense, contradictory, and deeply unsettling. Some sources suggested she had a legitimate claim. Others warned that governments, banks, or heirs of the original owners could challenge her. The only certainty was that she needed help, and that help needed to come from someone she could trust. She thought of the architectural historian who had written about forgotten structures, the one whose contact information she had found months ago while researching the tower. The woman had seemed knowledgeable, professional, someone who valued history over profit. She drafted an email carefully, explaining that she had purchased an old observation tower and discovered documents and artifacts that might be historically significant. She did not mention the vault's contents directly. She simply asked if the woman would be willing to consult, to help her understand what she had found. The reply came within hours. The historian was intrigued, cautiously enthusiastic, and willing to visit the following week. The mother confirmed the meeting, then closed her laptop and sat in the growing darkness, feeling the weight of the secret pressing down on her. She had crossed a line. There was no going back now. The historian arrived on a clear, cold morning, her car pulling up to the tower with the same quiet efficiency the mother had come to associate with people who took their work seriously. The woman was in her 50s, gray-haired and sharp-eyed, dressed in practical clothing that suggested she was used to field work. She introduced herself warmly, shook the mother's hand, and gazed up at the tower with an expression that bordered on reverence. "It is beautiful," she said. "These structures are so rare now. Most of them have been torn down or left to collapse." The mother unlocked the door and led her inside, watching as the historian examined every detail. The woman moved slowly, touching the walls, inspecting the ladder, asking questions about the tower's condition when it was purchased. When they reached the 5th floor, the historian paused at the scratches on the wall, her fingers tracing the patterns with a tenderness that made the mother's chest tighten. "These are observation marks," the historian said. "Someone stood here and recorded what they saw. This is extraordinary." The mother nodded. "There is more," she said quietly. She led the historian to the dome, opened the hidden panel, and gestured toward the shaft above. The historian's eyes widened. A hidden level? The mother confirmed it, and together they climbed. When they emerged into the vault room, the historian stood frozen, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. She moved toward the open vault, her movements slow, reverential, and stared at the contents within. For several long moments, she said nothing. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she asked, "Do you understand what this is?" The mother shook her head. "Not entirely." The historian turned to face her, her expression grave. "This is not just valuable. This is historically significant. These assets, the way they have been preserved, the documentation, this could rewrite entire chapters of history. But it is also," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "extraordinarily complicated." They descended together, and in the cold light of the 1st floor, the historian explained what the mother had suspected, but not fully understood. The vault's contents likely dated back to a period of significant upheaval, when assets were moved, hidden, protected from seizure or loss. The network mentioned in the ledger might have been involved in activities that ranged from the entirely legal to the deeply questionable. Proving ownership, authenticating the items, and navigating the legal landscape would require experts, lawyers, appraisers, and time. The historian offered to help, to connect the mother with people who could be trusted, who understood the complexity of such discoveries. But she also warned that once the process began, it could not be stopped. The vault's existence would become known, and with that knowledge would come scrutiny, pressure, and attention the mother might not be prepared to handle. The mother listened, her hands folded tightly in her lap, and made her decision. "I want to do this right," she said. "I do not want to hide it. I want to understand what I have found, and I want to claim it if it is mine to claim." The historian nodded, respect clear in her expression. "Then, we will do this carefully." Over the following weeks, the tower became the center of an operation that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. The historian brought in a small team, carefully vetted, each person bound by confidentiality agreements and professional ethics. An appraiser arrived first, a man in his 60s with a jeweler's loupe and a manner so calm it bordered on unsettling. He examined the gemstones one by one, weighing them, studying them under magnification, making notes in a leather-bound notebook. When he finished, he set down his tools and looked at the mother with an expression she could not quite read. "These are real," he said. "Museum quality. Individually, some of these stones are worth millions. Collectively," he paused, as if the number itself required a moment of respect. This collection is worth more than most people will see in a lifetime. The gold was appraised next. The bars tested for purity and authenticity. Each one bore markings that traced back to mints that had operated decades ago. Their value compounded not just by weight, but by rarity. The documents, the bonds, and certificates were examined by a financial historian who verified their legitimacy, cross-referencing serial numbers and signatures against archived records. The ledger itself became a focal point. Historians pored over its entries, tracing names and events, constructing a timeline that painted a picture of the vault's origins. What emerged was a story of a man, a meteorologist by training, who had worked in the tower during the 1,940 seconds and 50 seconds. He had been part of a network that moved assets for wealthy individuals and organizations seeking to protect their holdings during uncertain times. The tower's isolation, its official designation as a weather station, had provided perfect cover. Over the years, he had accumulated his own wealth, storing it in the vault he had designed, waiting for a future that never came. He had died in the 1,970 seconds, the historian explained, with no known heirs. The tower had passed through a series of owners who either never discovered the vault or chose to leave it undisturbed. And then it had been abandoned, left to decay, until the mother had bought it for $650. The appraisals took weeks. When they were finally complete, the team gathered in the first floor of the tower, and the lead appraiser delivered the figure that would change everything. The total estimated value, he said, his voice steady but his eyes betraying his awe, is $682 million. The number hung in the air, impossible and real at the same time. The mother felt her vision narrow, her hearing fade to a dull roar. 682 million. She had spent 650. The disparity was so vast it felt like a joke, like something that could not possibly be true. But the appraiser's face held no humor, only the sober acknowledgement of fact. The historian placed a hand on the mother's shoulder, grounding her. "This is yours," she said. "Legally, ethically, this is yours, but claiming it will not be simple." The mother nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She thought about her children, about the apartment she could now leave behind, about the medical bills and the overdue rent and the endless weight of scarcity that had defined her entire adult life. And she thought about the man who had built the vault, who had stood in this tower and watched the sky, who had believed in the future enough to protect something for it. She would honor that. She would claim what was hers, but she would do it the right way. The news, when it began to spread, did so in whispers at first. The mother had been careful, working only with people bound by confidentiality, but rumors had a way of seeping through even the tightest seals. Someone mentioned the tower to someone else, who mentioned the appraisals to a friend, who spoke just a little too loudly at a bar. Within days, the story had begun to circulate, distorted and exaggerated, but close enough to the truth to be dangerous. She first noticed the change when she went to pick up her children from school. The other parents watched her differently now, their gazes lingering, their whispers barely concealed. One woman approached her in the parking lot, her smile too bright, her questions too pointed. "I heard you found something interesting in that old tower." The mother answered vaguely, deflecting, but the woman persisted. "People are saying it is valuable, that you are going to be rich." The mother excused herself and left quickly, her hands trembling on the steering wheel. At work, the shift was even more pronounced. Her supervisor called her into the office, ostensibly to discuss her schedule, but the conversation turned almost immediately to the tower. The woman leaned forward, her tone conspiratorial. "Is it true? Did you really find treasure?" The mother denied it, said it was exaggerated, but the supervisor's expression made it clear she did not believe her. "People talk," the woman said, "and when they talk, things get complicated." That night, the mother received the first of many calls. The voice on the other end was polite, professional, claiming to represent a legal firm interested in discussing the tower's history. She declined to engage and hung up. Another call followed an hour later, this one less polite, suggesting that the vault's contents might be subject to claims from previous owners or their estates. She hung up again, but the calls kept coming, each one a new attempt to unsettle her, to plant doubt, to suggest that what she had found was not truly hers. The pressure intensified. A man appeared at her apartment one evening, claiming to be a journalist working on a story about forgotten structures. He asked invasive questions, pushed when she refused to answer, and only left when she threatened to call the police. Another visitor arrived the next day, representing a historical society that claimed jurisdiction over any artifacts found in the tower. She sent him away, but his presence lingered, a reminder that the world had noticed, and it wanted what she had. The historian called to warn her that inquiries were being made, that people with resources and influence were beginning to take interest. Some were legitimate, she said, academics and institutions genuinely concerned with preservation. But others were less scrupulous, opportunists looking for a way to profit, or litigants hoping to challenge her claim. The mother listened, her jaw tight, and asked what she should do. "Document everything," the historian said. "Secure the site and prepare for a fight." She hired a lawyer, a woman recommended by the historian, someone with experience in property law and treasure trove cases. The lawyer reviewed the documentation, the appraisals, the ledger, and delivered her assessment with the bluntness the mother had come to appreciate. "You have a strong claim," she said. "The tower was purchased legally, the vault was undisclosed at the time of sale, and the contents have been abandoned for decades. But strong does not mean uncontested. Expect challenges." The challenges came quickly. A distant relative of the man who had built the vault emerged, claiming inheritance rights. The claim was weak, the lawyer assured her, based on genealogy that was questionable and a relationship that had never been acknowledged. But it would still require time and legal proceedings to resolve. A local government agency filed a notice suggesting that the tower might be subject to historical preservation laws that restricted what could be removed from the site. "Another weak claim," the lawyer said, "but another delay." The mother endured it all with a determination that surprised even herself. She had spent years being pushed, dismissed, made to feel small by a world that valued her only for what she could produce. But this was hers. She had found it, uncovered it, claimed it through effort and intuition and sheer refusal to give up. No one was going to take it from her without a fight. The tower itself became a fortress. She installed better locks, security cameras, motion sensors. She visited it daily, checking for signs of intrusion, ensuring that the vault remained sealed and undisturbed. The children asked why they could not visit anymore, and she promised they would soon, once things were settled. They accepted it with the trust they always gave her, though she could see the confusion in their eyes. At night, alone in the apartment, she allowed herself moments of doubt. She thought about how easy it would be to walk away, to sell the tower, to take a fraction of the vault's worth and disappear somewhere quiet. But walking away felt like surrender, and she had not survived this long by surrendering. She thought instead about the man who had built the vault, about the scratches on the wall, about the observations recorded with such care. He had believed in something, had worked toward a future he never saw. She would honor that. She would see this through. The legal process ground forward, with agonizing slowness. Hearings, depositions, motions, filed and countered. The lawyer fought every challenge with precision, dismantling weak claims, discrediting opportunistic litigants, building a case that was as much about principle as it was about property. And slowly, piece by piece, the mother's claim solidified. The distant relative's challenge was dismissed. The preservation agency's notice was withdrawn. Other claims fell away, revealed as baseless or motivated by greed rather than legitimate interest. Months passed. The mother continued working, though she no longer needed the income in the way she once had. The vault remained sealed, its contents untouched except for the appraisals and documentation required by law. She waited, patient in a way she had never been before, trusting that the process, slow as it was, would eventually deliver what was rightfully hers. And then, on a cold morning in late autumn, the lawyer called with news that made the mother's hands shake. The final challenge had been resolved. The claim was hers. The vault and its contents belonged to her, legally and irrevocably. She sat at the kitchen table, the phone still pressed to her ear, and let the reality wash over her. $682 million. Hers. The poverty that had defined her life. The struggle that had shaped every decision. The fear that had woken her in the middle of the night for years. All of it was over. She thought about her children, asleep in the next room, unaware that their lives had just changed in ways they could not yet comprehend. She thought about the apartment, the bills, the landlord who had raised the rent without concern for whether she could pay. She thought about the people who had laughed, who had dismissed her, who had assumed she was making a mistake, and she felt something she had not allowed herself to feel in a very long time. She felt vindicated. But vindication, she understood, was not the same as triumph. The vault's contents were hers, but they carried weight beyond their monetary value. They were a responsibility, a legacy, a story that deserved to be told. She would not hoard them. She would not hide them away as they had been hidden before. She would bring them into the light, use them to build something better, not just for herself, but for others who struggled as she had. She called the historian that night and told her the news. The woman's voice was warm with genuine happiness. "You did it," she said. "You stood your ground." The mother thanked her, then asked a question she had been considering for weeks. What if we turned the tower into something? A museum, an educational center, something that honors its history and shares what was found there. The historian was quiet for a moment, then spoke with a conviction that made the mother's chest tighten. That would be extraordinary. They began planning immediately. The tower would be restored, its structure preserved while being made safe and accessible. The vault would remain, but it would be displayed, its story told alongside the observations that had been recorded on the walls. The contents would be documented, photographed, studied, and a portion would be donated to institutions that could ensure their preservation. The rest, the wealth that remained, would be used to create something lasting. A foundation, perhaps, dedicated to helping families in crisis, to providing opportunities for people who had been overlooked, to proving that value could be found in the places others dismissed. The mother spent the following weeks in motion, meeting with architects, historians, lawyers, and financial advisors. She moved out of the apartment, taking the children to a temporary rental that was clean and warm and spacious, a place that felt like a breath after years of suffocation. She paid off every bill, every debt, every obligation that had hung over her like a weight, and she began to plan for a future that no longer felt dictated by scarcity. The tower, when she visited it now, felt different. It was no longer a burden or a gamble. It was proof. Proof that she had been right to trust her instincts, right to refuse the easy path of surrender, right to believe that sometimes the things others dismissed held more value than anyone imagined. She stood in the dome, looking out at the sky, and thought about the man who had built this place, who had watched these same clouds, who had believed in a future he would never see. She understood him now in a way she had not before. He had not been hiding wealth. He had been preserving possibility. And she, in finding it, had fulfilled something he might have hoped for, but could never guarantee. That someone would come, someone who needed what he had protected, someone who would use it not just for themselves but for something larger. As the year turned and the restoration of the tower began, the mother stood once more at its base, her children beside her. They asked what the tower would become, and she told them, a place for learning, a place for remembering, a place that proved that even the smallest, strangest, most overlooked things could hold wonders if someone was willing to look closely enough. Her daughter gazed up at the structure, its scaffolding now surrounding it like a protective shell, and smiled. "It looks like the clouds are holding it up," she said. The mother followed her gaze and saw what she meant. The sky above was vast and bright, the clouds drifting slowly, and for a moment it did seem as if the tower floated among them, suspended between earth and sky. She squeezed her daughter's hand. "Maybe they are," she said softly. "Maybe they always were." The transformation did not announce itself with fanfare. It arrived quietly, in small moments that accumulated like snow, each one light on its own, but together forming something substantial enough to reshape the landscape of her life entirely. The morning after the final legal confirmation arrived, the mother woke in the rental house, not to an alarm clock set for a shift she could not afford to miss, but to sunlight streaming through curtains she had chosen herself because they were beautiful rather than because they were cheap. She lay there for a moment, listening to the silence, the absence of anxiety that had been her companion for so long that its departure felt almost disorienting. Her children slept peacefully in rooms that were entirely their own, not shared, not cramped, not shadowed by the knowledge that a single month of bad luck could take it all away. She rose and made coffee in a kitchen where every appliance worked, where the refrigerator was full, where the bills stacked on the counter were already paid, their envelopes opened not with dread, but with the casual indifference that came from knowing they no longer mattered. The first calls began arriving before breakfast. The lawyer, confirming the wire transfers that would move the authenticated assets into accounts she now controlled. The financial advisor, explaining investment strategies, trust funds, portfolio diversification in language that felt foreign but no longer frightening. The architect, eager to discuss the tower restoration, the timelines, the vision they had spent weeks refining together. She answered each call with a calm that surprised her, making decisions that would have been impossible months ago, signing documents that represented sums she still could not fully comprehend. But it was the unexpected calls that carried the most weight. The first came from her old landlord, his voice carefully neutral as he explained that he had heard about her circumstances, that he wanted to congratulate her, that if she ever needed a reference for anything at all, he would be happy to provide one. She thanked him politely and ended the call, remembering the notice he had served, the rent increase that had seemed insurmountable, the absolute indifference he had shown when she had asked for flexibility. His congratulations meant nothing now, but they confirmed something she had already understood. People saw her differently. The world itself had shifted. Her sister called next, her voice tight with an emotion the mother could not immediately identify. "I heard," her sister said, the words coming slowly, as if each one required effort, "about the tower, about what you found." The mother confirmed it briefly, offering no details beyond what was already public knowledge. Her sister was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice had changed. "I was wrong," she said. "When you bought that place, I thought you were making the worst mistake of your life. I told you that. I believed it." The mother said nothing, letting the silence stretch. Her sister continued, the words tumbling out faster now. "I was scared for you, but I think I was jealous. Jealous that you were willing to take a risk I never would have taken. And I am sorry. I am sorry I did not support you. I am sorry I laughed." The apology hung between them, fragile and genuine. The mother felt something loosen in her chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but the release of a weight she had been carrying without realizing it. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That means more than you know." When the call ended, she sat at the table and let herself feel the full measure of what had just happened. Her sister, who had been the loudest voice of criticism, had acknowledged she was wrong. It did not erase the hurt, but it shifted something fundamental. Vindication, she was learning, was not always loud. Sometimes it arrived in quiet admissions, in words spoken softly, in the slow recognition that judgment had been premature. The children adjusted to their new reality with the remarkable flexibility of youth, though their questions revealed how deeply the old life had shaped them. Her daughter asked one morning why they were buying new shoes when the old ones still fit, her voice uncertain, as if expecting to be told they could not afford it. The mother knelt, looked into her daughter's eyes, and said gently, "Because you deserve new shoes, because we do not have to wait until things fall apart before we replace them anymore." Her daughter processed this, then smiled, the relief in her expression breaking the mother's heart, even as it filled her with determination never to let her children feel that weight again. Her son asked why they were eating out at a restaurant, a rare treat that had once required weeks of planning and careful budgeting. "Because we can," the mother said simply. "Because I want to. Because I want you to know that life does not have to be about survival every single day." They ate slowly, savoring food they chose from a menu rather than calculating which option stretched furthest. When the check arrived, she paid it without looking at the total, a small act that felt monumental. The vindication she experienced in those early weeks came in forms both expected and surprising. At the grocery store, she ran into the neighbor who had joked about her tower project, the one who had laughed and said he would not touch the place for any amount of money. He saw her, his expression shifting through a rapid sequence: surprise, recognition, discomfort. He approached with a smile that did not quite reach his eyes. "I heard about what you found," he said. "That is incredible, really incredible." She thanked him, keeping her tone neutral. He shifted his weight, clearly wanting to say more, but uncertain how to proceed. "I guess I owe you an apology," he said finally. "I did not think, I never imagined." She looked at him steadily. "No one did. But that is okay. I did not buy it for anyone's approval." His smile faded slightly, and he nodded, the weight of his misjudgment settling visibly on his shoulders. When he walked away, she felt no satisfaction in his discomfort, only a quiet recognition that she had been right to trust herself, even when no one else had. At her former workplace, the reactions were more complex. She had given notice weeks earlier, explaining simply that her circumstances had changed. Her supervisor had accepted it with poorly concealed frustration, and the other cleaners had responded with a mixture of congratulations and thinly veiled resentment. On her last day, she arrived to find the building unusually full, as if people had arranged to be there just to see her. One co-worker approached, someone who had always been kind, and hugged her tightly. "You deserve this," she said. You worked harder than anyone." Another stood at a distance, arms crossed, her expression sour. "Some people have all the luck," she muttered, just loud enough to be heard. The mother did not respond. Luck had played a role, yes, but so had courage, determination, and the willingness to see value where others saw nothing. The supervisor called her into the office one last time, ostensibly to finalize paperwork. The woman sat across from her, hands folded, and spoke in a tone that attempted warmth but landed somewhere closer to calculation. "You know, if you ever want to invest in expanding the business, I would be open to discussing partnership opportunities." The mother met her gaze without blinking. "I appreciate the offer, but no." The supervisor's smile tightened. "Well, if you change your mind." She would not. She had not forgotten the skepticism, the doubt, the way this woman had questioned her commitment when she needed time off, the way she had treated her as replaceable, forgettable. The business might be sound, but she had no interest in tethering herself to people who had only valued her once she no longer needed them. The mother's transformation became visible in her community in ways that surprised even her. She did not flaunt her wealth, did not purchase ostentatious things, or make grand announcements. But her presence changed. She walked through the world with her shoulders back, her gaze steady, no longer apologizing with her posture for taking up space. When she spoke, people listened in a way they had not before, as if wealth had granted her a credibility that struggle had denied her. She found this both useful and infuriating, a reminder that respect was often tied to status rather than character. But she used that respect deliberately. She donated to the children's school, funding programs that had been cut, ensuring that other families did not have to navigate the same gaps she had faced. She paid off medical debts for families she knew were struggling, doing so anonymously, understanding that charity carried its own kind of weight, and wanting to spare them the complicated gratitude that came with knowing a donor's name. She worked with community organizations, funneling resources toward housing assistance, job training, childcare support, the invisible infrastructure that made survival possible for people living paycheck to paycheck. The tower restoration became the center of her public transformation. The project drew attention from architectural journals, historical societies, local news outlets, all eager to tell the story of the forgotten structure and the single mother who had uncovered its secrets. She gave interviews carefully, always crediting the historians and experts who had helped her, always emphasizing that the tower's value lay not just in what had been hidden there, but in what it represented. "A reminder," she said in one interview, "that things dismissed as worthless often hold extraordinary value if someone is willing to look closely enough." The restoration itself was a work of careful balance. The structure needed to be made safe, accessible, compliant with modern codes, but it also needed to retain the integrity that made it significant. The architect she hired understood this instinctively, designing interventions that supported rather than altered, preserving the spiral staircase, the narrow rooms, the dome, the scratches on the walls that had started everything. When workers uncovered additional artifacts during the renovation, small items left behind by the man who had built the vault, tools, notebooks, personal effects, each one was documented, preserved, added to the story the tower would eventually tell. The vault itself remained in place, though its contents had been removed for authentication and distribution. The space was converted into an exhibition area, its walls lined with photographs and descriptions of what had been found. The gemstones, the gold, the bonds, the ledger. Visitors would be able to stand where she had stood, to understand the scale of what had been hidden, to imagine the moment of discovery. The mother insisted on one detail that the architect initially resisted: a small placard near the vault entrance that read simply, "Purchased for $650, November 2023. The architect argued it was too personal, too specific. The mother disagreed. "That detail matters," she said. "It shows that value is not always obvious, that sometimes the best investments are the ones everyone else dismisses." The placard stayed. As the months passed and the tower's transformation progressed, the mother found herself returning to a mystery that had never been fully resolved: the childhood-home connection. It had been mentioned in passing by the historian early on, a strange detail in the ledger that had seemed minor at the time, but had lingered in her mind. She asked the historian to revisit it, to explain what she had meant. The historian pulled up her notes, scanning through pages of documentation, and found the entry. "Here," she said, pointing. The ledger mentioned that the meteorologist who built the vault had a daughter. She was young when he died, and she was sent to live with relatives in another state. The house she grew up in was described in one of his letters. He wrote about how she used to stand outside and watch the clouds, how she said they looked like buildings, like they were forming shapes of places she wanted to live. The mother's breath caught. What was the address? The historian read it aloud, and the room seemed to tilt. That was her address. The house where she had grown up, where she had lived until she was 12, before her parents divorced and everything fractured. She sat down slowly, her hands trembling. The historian looked at her, concern clear in her expression. "Are you all right?" The mother nodded, though she was not certain it was true. The meteorologist who built the vault had lived in the same house she had grown up in. His daughter, the one who watched the clouds, had stood in the same yard, looked at the same sky. The connection was not genealogical. The historian had confirmed that early on, but it was something else: spatial, temporal, a thread that linked her childhood to this moment in ways that defied simple explanation. She drove to the old neighborhood that weekend, parking across the street from the house that had once been hers. It looked smaller than she remembered, the yard overgrown, the paint faded, but the sky above it was vast and open, just as it had been when she was a child. She remembered standing there, looking up, seeing the clouds shift and change, forming shapes that seemed intentional: castles, towers, cities floating in the air. Her mother had told her to stop daydreaming, to come inside, to focus on practical things. But she had never stopped watching the sky. Even as an adult, even in her darkest moments, she had looked up and found comfort in the clouds, in their movement, in the reminder that the world was larger than her immediate struggles. The meteorologist's daughter had done the same, had stood in this same place, watched the same sky, dreamed the same dreams. And decades later, through a series of choices and chances that seemed almost impossible, she had found what that daughter's father had hidden. She had uncovered the legacy meant for a future he could not see, and in doing so, she had fulfilled something that felt less like coincidence and more like completion. The clouds form her childhood home. She understood now. It was not literal, though the connection to the house made it feel eerily close. It was metaphorical. The tower, rising into the sky, had given her what she had dreamed of as a child: a place that touched the clouds, a place where she could stand above the world and feel possibility instead of limitation. The meteorologist had built that place, and she had found it, and together, across the gap of decades, they had created something neither of them could have achieved alone. She drove back to the rental house, her mind full of the weight of that realization. That night, she sat with her children and told them a story about a man who watched the sky and built a tower, about a little girl who watched the clouds and dreamed of flying, about how sometimes the things we build and the dreams we have find each other in ways we cannot predict, and how that is not luck or fate, but something in between. Her daughter listened intently, her eyes wide. "Did the little girl get to fly?" she asked. The mother smiled. "In a way, yes, she did." The tower's grand opening came on a bright spring morning, the kind of day that felt deliberately chosen for its symbolism, even though the weather was beyond anyone's control. The structure stood transformed, its brickwork cleaned and restored, its spiral staircase reinforced and painted, its dome gleaming. A small crowd gathered: journalists, historians, community members, people who had followed the story and wanted to see the ending. The mother stood at the base of the tower, her children beside her, and prepared to speak. She had written notes, then discarded them. What she needed to say did not fit neatly onto paper. She thanked the people who had helped her: the historian, the lawyer, the architect, the experts who had authenticated the vault's contents and fought to ensure her claim was recognized. She thanked her children for their patience, for their trust, for being the reason she had taken the risk in the first place. And then she spoke about the tower itself, about what it represented. "This place was dismissed," she said, her voice steady. "People laughed when I bought it. They thought I was desperate, foolish, making a mistake. And maybe I was desperate, but I was also willing to see value where others saw none. I was willing to believe that something overlooked might still matter." She gestured toward the tower. This structure was built by a man who believed in the future, who worked in isolation to create something that would endure. He did not live to see what his work became. But his effort was not wasted. It waited, and when the time was right, it revealed itself. She paused, her gaze sweeping across the crowd. "I did not find treasure because I was lucky. I found it because I was willing to look, because I refused to accept that my circumstances were all I deserved. Because I believed that if I worked hard enough, paid close enough attention, I might find something that could change everything. And I did." The applause that followed was genuine, warm, and as it faded, people began moving toward the tower, eager to climb its stairs and see the vault, to stand in the dome and look out at the sky. The mother stayed at the base, watching them ascend, feeling a satisfaction that was deeper and quieter than triumph. This was not about proving people wrong, though she had done that. It was about proving herself right, about validating the instinct she had trusted when logic suggested she should not, about showing her children that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to give up on yourself. In the weeks and months that followed, the tower became a fixture in the community, a destination for school groups, tourists, people seeking inspiration, or simply curious about the story. The mother visited often, walking through the space she had once scrubbed and measured and doubted. She stood in the vault room, now empty except for the photographs and plaques that told its history, and marveled at how far she had come. She climbed to the dome and looked out at the clouds, watching them drift and shift, forming shapes that seemed intentional, even though she knew they were not. Or maybe they were. Maybe the world had patterns, connections, threads that linked people and places across time, in ways that only became visible when you looked closely enough. Her life, transformed as it was, settled into a new rhythm. She enrolled her children in better schools, where they thrived without the weight of instability shadowing them. She bought a house, modest by some standards but enormous by hers, with a yard where they could play and rooms that felt like permanence. She hired people to help manage the foundation she had established, the one that funded programs for families in crisis, that provided scholarships, that ensured other people might have the chances she had fought so hard to create for herself. She did not work in the way she once had, scrubbing floors and counting pennies, but she worked harder than ever, pouring herself into projects that mattered, that created lasting change, that honored the struggle she had endured, by ensuring others did not have to endure it alone. The vindication she felt was not constant, but it returned in moments both large and small. When her daughter graduated at the top of her class and thanked her mother in her speech for teaching her to see value in unexpected places. When her son, older now, stood in the tower's dome and said quietly, "This is where everything changed, is not it?" When former neighbors, co-workers, people who had doubted her, reached out not to apologize, but to say simply, "You inspire me. I did not understand, but I do now." She accepted their words with grace, understanding that vindication was not about making others feel small. It was about standing tall enough that they could not help but notice. One afternoon, several years after the tower's opening, she returned to the 5th floor alone. The scratches on the wall were protected now, behind glass, preserved for future visitors. But she stood as close as she could, tracing the patterns with her eyes. Clouds, rain, observations. She thought about the meteorologist who had made these marks, who had stood in this exact spot and recorded what he saw. She thought about his daughter, who had watched the same sky and dreamed of places that did not yet exist. And she thought about herself, standing here now, having found what they had left behind, having built something new from it. The connection felt complete, a circle closed across decades, across lives that had never intersected but had somehow shaped each other all the same. She climbed to the dome one last time that day, stepping out into the glass enclosure, where the sky pressed close on all sides. The clouds were thick and low, drifting in formations that shifted as she watched. For a moment, just a moment, they seemed to form a shape. A house, familiar, small, the kind of place a child might draw, with windows and a door and a roof that sloped gently. She blinked, and the shape dissolved, the clouds moving on, indifferent to the meaning she had tried to assign them, but the feeling remained. The sense that the sky itself had acknowledged her, had shown her something only she could see, had whispered that she was exactly where she was meant to be. She thought about the title people had given her story. The clouds form her childhood home. It was poetic, perhaps too poetic, but it held truth all the same. The tower had given her a home in ways that went beyond shelter. It had given her stability, dignity, proof that she was capable of more than survival. It had given her children a future that was not defined by scarcity. It had given her a purpose that felt larger than herself, a way to transform what she had found into something that mattered beyond her own life. And it had connected her to a past she had not known she shared, to a man who had built in hope and a girl who had dreamed in clouds, to a lineage of people who believed that the sky was not a limit, but a destination. As the years passed, the tower stood as a testament to all of that. Visitors came and left, each taking something different from the experience. Some saw it as a story about wealth, about the transformative power of money. Others saw it as a story about perseverance, about refusing to give up even when the odds seemed impossible. Still others saw it as a story about chance, about being in the right place at the right time. The mother knew it was all of those things, and none of them. It was a story about attention, about looking closely at what others dismissed, about trusting that even the smallest, strangest, most overlooked things might hold value if you were willing to see them clearly. She grew older, her children grew up, and the tower remained. It became part of the landscape, a landmark that people pointed out to visitors, a place that held history and hope in equal measure. She continued to visit, climbing the stairs more slowly now, but with the same sense of purpose. She stood in the dome and watched the clouds, and sometimes, when the light was right and the wind was still, she could almost see it again. The house forming in the sky, the shape that had started everything, the dream that had refused to die even when every practical consideration suggested it should. On the 10th anniversary of the tower's opening, a ceremony was held. Plaques were unveiled, speeches were given, and the mother stood once more before a crowd, older now, but no less certain. She spoke about gratitude, about the people who had helped her and the journey that had brought her to this place. She spoke about her children, about the future they now had, about the knowledge that they would never have to fight the battles she had fought. And she spoke about the tower itself, about the man who had built it and the secrets it had held, about the way the past and present had woven together to create something neither could have achieved alone. When the speeches ended and the crowd dispersed, she climbed the tower one final time that day. She moved through the floors slowly, touching the walls, feeling the solidity of the structure beneath her hands. She reached the dome and stepped inside, and there, written on the glass in a child's handwriting, was a message. Her daughter had left it, years ago, before the glass had been sealed. It read simply, "Mom found the clouds." She smiled, her eyes burning with tears she did not try to hide. Yes, she thought, she had found them, and they had found her, and together they had built something that would endure long after she was gone, a place where people could stand and look up and believe, as she had believed, that the sky was not a barrier, but a beginning. The tower stood against the horizon, red brick and gleaming dome, its shape unmistakable even from a distance. It had been purchased for $650 by a woman who had nothing but determination and a willingness to see what others could not. It had revealed a fortune worth $682 million, wealth that had transformed her life and the lives of countless others. But more than that, it had revealed a truth that could not be measured in money, that value is not always obvious, that the things we dismiss, the places we overlook, the people we underestimate, often hold more than we can imagine, that sometimes the best thing you can do is trust yourself even when the world insists you are wrong, and that when you do, when you refuse to surrender to the judgment of others, when you stand in a place everyone else has abandoned and see possibility where they see nothing, you might just find that the clouds, vast and ever-changing, have been forming your home all along. You simply had to be willing to look up and see it. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you will really enjoy them. And do not forget to subscribe if you have not already. See you in the next story.